So today we're here to learn about patient-oriented research to promote culturally safe care with Indigenous mothers in Saskatchewan. Our presenters are Dr. Angela Bowen, Janice Osecap, and Carrie Pratt. Angela Bowen is a registered nurse and a trained midwife with a PhD in community health and epidemiology, focusing on socially vulnerable, including Aboriginal mothers. Dr. Bowen has extensive clinical education and administration experience in obstetrics and mental health. Her research focus is on maternal mental health, bringing these areas together. Janice Osecap is a Cree mother from Moosomin First Nation. She's currently a student in the Indian Teacher Program, ITEP, in the College of Education, and is an active and invaluable member of the Indigenous Birth Network research team. Janice is proud of her cultural upbringing and passionate about helping Indigenous youth access their culture. She is a recipient of the Indigenous Achievement Award as well as the CIHR Award to travel to Montreal in June 2019 to present at the Indigenous Gender Wellness Idea Fair and Learning Circle. Janice aims to help create positive Indigenous identities and foster individual confidence for Indigenous youth. Carrie Pratt is from Birch Hill, Saskatchewan, and is of Cree, Métis, and settler ancestry. She works as a registered nurse in rural home care while she completes full-time studies in the Masters of Nursing thesis program at the University of Saskatchewan. She uses participatory action research and patient-oriented research to understand the lived experiences of Indigenous mothers who've had a baby in a Saskatchewan hospital. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Angela Bowen, Janice Osecap, and Carrie Pratt.
Thank you. We already did that. SCPOR already did their own acknowledgement, but I'm a white settler. I came to Canada in 1963, lost my accent very quickly because I wanted to be just like everybody else at the time. And that's an old bio. My main research now is this Indigenous Birth Network and the work that we do, and which was very much triggered by I was in Australia when it happened, when those 6 young women took their lives in La Loche, and my focus was maternal mental health, and it was one of those light bulb moments that I'm at the wrong end of this. I need to be helping people connect with their land and feel more safe and not so desperate. So I'll talk about the background. Janice, who was our mother advisor, and I got to complain, Skipper, that you have now taken her to be a patient advisor, which means you owe me a mother. It is really hard to keep mothers. They have babies, they get pregnant again, go back to work. Anyway, but she's a keeper. We're keeping her. And Carrie, who is our star graduate student. She's rolling her eyes. She's one of your Skipper trainees. She's also Indigenous mentorship mentee. I don't know if I invented that word. Anyway, so we'll start. I see this as my personal TRC, this work that I'm doing to thank Canada for being a great place to live, really, and the people who let me live here. And our research and all of the projects that I put in now are guided mostly by these 2 calls to action. Number 22, we call upon those who can affect change within the Canadian healthcare system to recognize the value of Aboriginal healing practices and use them in the treatment of Aboriginal patients in collaboration with Aboriginal healers and elders where requested by Aboriginal patients. 23.1, increasing the number of healthcare providers working in Aboriginal communities. Why? Because engaging and supporting, I believe, Indigenous mothers will foster kinship, stop women from not feeling connected to their families and their home communities, which will promote their spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical well-being, which, if you're familiar at all with the medicine wheel, are the 4 components of the directions within it, and their families to achieve healthful lives. Improving access to traditional birth practices will help to address disparities in health access and outcomes experienced by Indigenous families in our province, especially those living in rural and remote communities. And to try and reduce the isolation experienced when women are forced, and someone told me once that was too strong a word, it is absolutely the correct word, forced to leave their home community. So there's a number of projects that have come from the first one that Carrie and I started. and that most of her thesis work has been involved with, but she's connected with everything that we do, and she'll talk more about it, is the Indigenous Women's Perspective for Culturally Secure Birth. That was funded by the Jim Pattison Children's Hospital Foundation, and that research is ongoing still. Bringing Back Birth, which was SCPOR and SHRF, our Sprout Award to improve access to culturally safe birth in Saskatchewan. Because the first one is focused, it expanded to the Saskatoon area and improving things at RUH, to tell you the truth. And then really thinking beyond in terms of what could we do to improve things throughout the province, because I never think small, that to try and look at policies, because mothers come from those communities to the hospital, sometimes emergently, sometimes planned. So it makes sense to look at it. And if we're going to meet those TRC recommendations, we have to look at access to health, and we have to look at improving access to education that promotes culturally safe birth. Walking with Women, I'm just so grateful to SCPOR and SHRF for this award. That's the Leader Award, which buys out most of my teaching, hallelujah, because I would not be able to do this work. And the amount of time and effort it takes to do the relationship building, to go to the communities, to even think. I just am so grateful for it, and I hope they renew me, just saying. And those recommendations we make will go to the governments, and by governments, I truly mean that, Indigenous governments, provincial, SHA as a governmental group, the federal, so we have them all involved in the various committees that we have within our Indigenous Birth Network. Honoring traditional Indigenous birth stories, because one of the things that's obvious is there is a huge gap caused by residential schools and the 60s scoop in passing down the oral traditions related to birth and teaching and early childhood care, all of those things having been lost. So I was able to get a little bit of money from the College of Nursing, and we had a grandmother's gathering, which was really overwhelming in terms of the sensations and feelings in the room. For some were crying. It was the first time they'd ever come together in this and been acknowledged, and collecting stories and what we'll do with it in terms of a video, a book. We've had both offered, and how we'll go forth. Well, if we're going to look after the matriarchs, then we have to really think about looking after them. So we did get some funding from the CID SHRF, to look at trying to preserve the brain health of the grandmas. So many of them have diabetes, hypertension. And now I'm a grandma, I'm getting those things too. It's disgusting, but it's true. No, not the diabetes yet. Anyway, but trying to look at how do they perceive their health as they get older. I had some younger moms and care providers say to me that some of the grandmas think it's normal to just not function anymore when they forget things, and that there's almost an acceptance within communities for them to become more juvenile and not be the leaders that they were. And so we're just starting this project in Sturgeon Lake in Ela La Crosse, and really looking forward to it. Strong matriarch groups up there. We also, because women can get pregnant by themselves if they, have a test tube or whatever, but usually it involves a father, and they are important. And I do get criticized even in my maternal health work for only focusing on the mother. Well, you can only do one thing at a time. But I do have a graduate student and a master's in public health student, and he's looking for his practicum at the rites of passage from adolescence into early fatherhood. He is a father. And I think that will be really informative. We're doing that up in Sturgeon Lake in the summer, and he's very, very keen, and they're very accepting, and I really appreciate that. So those are some of the things that are going on. We had our first Indigenous Birth Network meeting almost 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. We have done a lot. It overwhelms me sometimes. Anyway, we're up in Wanuskewin, and we outgrew it. We had just then, it was sort of a long afternoon, and we looked at what were the priorities for this group. And we've stuck with them since. Cultural birth and practices. That's where the matriarchs come in, right? What are those practices that we need to share and learn, and ceremonies, all of those kinds of things, roles in education. So looking at within the birthing system, how can we improve that? Legislation and, of course, funding. It adds up to more than 100 because we took the top 2, and we had pages of things that we went through to get there. So we have 3 subcommittees of our network that deal in those areas and very active. We have had lots of support and very thankful for it from the National Aboriginal Council of Midwives, NACM, and we wrote a grant, and they came up to Sturgeon Lake. There's some, Leanne Smith is there. Some people might recognize her, Carrie, Kyla, some of our other people on our group. And that was really an amazing time as well for learning and really an environmental scan of those things that we want to do. This was a gathering we had last October, and this was a full day gathering. So we're working our way up. We're doing all kinds of things. And the lady in the middle is a traditional midwife from Minnesota, Doreen Day, who is doing work in Ontario. She trains doulas, all kinds of things. Norma Rabbitskin to the right of me is right now the acting health director, but the nursing supervisor up in Sturgeon Lake. Alice, and sorry, I don't know the other lady. I don't know her name, but she's from Sturgeon Lake. Alice is from the south in the province. We had a survey, which was a real learning lesson. We had it online, which didn't give us very much. We advertised all over, but I'll have a picture which will show more, but a few of us went to Treaty 4 gathering. That was a few days long, 4 days long. Treaty 10 gathering. We went to different cultural gatherings, powwows, communities, and had paper versions that we gave out. One of the, I think it's a funny story. Most people laugh, so please don't be offended. But we had in there doula, which is a kind of birth supporter. So when we were up in Beauval at that gathering, someone said, "What's this? Duala?" That's a Cree word because they're mostly Dene, right? Same thing in the South. What's this word? Anyway, so we aren't calling it doula unless we have to anymore. Most of the people who responded to the survey were Indigenous. Almost most lived on reserve. People also lived both. Very few had used a midwife because there's only 14 in the province, and there's hardly any. I mean, they're in not Prince Albert, they're lobbying for one. Saskatoon, Prince Albert had spots, but they didn't fill them. Saskatoon, Regina, Swift Current, All Nations. That's it. And they go within an hour of those communities. But 62% would have used one. Not everybody's familiar what the role even means. And it was pretty similar also for birth supporter. Really important is that 26% said they had knew of women who had birthed at home. So this could be Red Earth, where we were, Thunderchild. It could be anywhere in the province that they had birthed at home rather than come into the hospital designated for their community. Not just RUH, but that they had stayed where they were without assistance rather than go to a hospital, rather than leave their families. And that was really frightening. And one community in particular, they all knew of 5 or 6 a year that had chosen not to go in. And that, in meeting with government officials, that one really pops their little eyes. So, we'll continue to tell that story because it's true. So this is Treaty 10 gathering. We held workshops. We had circles. We had, there's a little picture there. I meant to bring it up, the moss bag I made. And then we had a grandma who was showing people how to do the moss bag. Red Earth, which is many hours away. Treaty 4, we did all kinds of things. So we've been wherever we're invited and then sometimes more. We also, when it comes then to, and that's us learning about culture, but also promoting the culture of birth within those communities and events that we go to. We've also partnered with the First Nations University of Canada, because one of our main partners is the Federation of Sovereign Indian Nations, and they partner with First Nations University of Canada, as did the U of S for our nursing program years ago, because it was obvious to us that A, we need more midwives, and B, we need midwives with a cultural component. 1 in 4 babies born in this province is to an Indigenous family. So you cannot choose to ignore this if you work at all in the baby business, either prenatal, postnatal, or in between. You just can't. So we're looking at this, and I didn't know there would be people from Ryerson, but I have talked to them about partnering with you. So that's very neat. We'll talk after. We're going to start tomorrow our workforce assessment for the government, because we have all the, I hope, appropriate people there. Tell us what we need to produce to you to get this going, and we'll have it ready for you, and you'll be part of our committee to produce it. So we can't go wrong. Saskatchewan Health Authority, in response actually to the tubal ligation story that many of you may have heard about, are going to look at training birth support workers with Gabriel Dumont, and we've had meetings about that, because it's really important to me that there be some seamless care between what the birth support workers are learning and the midwives, and because I still teach at the College of Nursing, nurses, other people. So I think it's really important that we find a way to get this cultural component the same. I am being trained as a doula up in Sturgeon Lake. I showed you the picture earlier of Doreen Day, and she's been coming up there. And it'll be a 3-year, very cultural component, many ceremonies that we have done. And it will be DONA, which is a good certification that we'll receive from that. But it's a very reflective program, and it's excellent. So this was us in February 2019 with that first doula training. This is a bear. But we did have, beside it was a buffalo. I wasn't allowed to take pictures of that. Many ceremonies that we took part in over those 4 days. So it was really quite amazing to me. All of the food was traditional. It was really fantastic. This was the honoring the matriarchs. Unfortunately, they weren't all in the picture. We got to get our pictures right away next time. There's our Eileen. And now I'll hand it over to Janice.
Hi there. Again, my name is Janice Osecap. I'm one of the mothers. And in the picture here, those are my 2 youngest. I have 3 children. And the saying is something that you probably heard a lot of different places. You know, the origin, it is always contested, like whether it come from African descent or Indigenous descent, but it really doesn't matter. It's the actual words that actually mean something to me and to other people. When thinking of that term, I'm not really thinking of, or a lot of like the way our Indigenous people think isn't, it takes everybody to contribute to the raising of a child, like to feed them and those kind of things. It's more to be mindful of our own interactions with that child. And that should be carried forward into like basically how we're handling things today. You know, like it carries a lot of weight, and sadly, it has gone through a lot of, you know, like my people have gone through a lot of hardship, and it kind of has lost itself along the way, but it's something that it should bring back. As mothers, like the other mothers that join me, I know we all have like the way our role as a mother for Indigenous isn't just, you know, like I birthed you, those kind of things. We're the first teachers, so we understand that, we honor that. And there's this saying that, like, there's always a saying, but because, you know, that's basically how our people are. It's like kind of oral history, you know, everything is passed on, our knowledge is passed on. Who said it? Like, that's always the question. But it's always like, for me, it was my mother and my grandmother, and for them, you know, it goes back forth like that. So, you know, like for us, it's kind of like our children are not like our possession. They were on loan to us from the Creator. So as mothers, like that's a very, very important job. And for some, they're unable to do that job because of the traumas that they're dealing with their everyday life. Like there are there's a different varying like a scale of trauma. And I myself have been through my own traumas, but some have been more extreme, some have not been. So I can imagine and I can understand why like a lot of people are so hurt that they cannot pick up that duty and be the mother that they are meant to be. You know, like I can relate to that in some level, and some it's like far past like my own comprehension. So leading with that, like our Indigenous knowledge, like this is something that's kind of been disputable for my people for like the longest time, is the fact that anything that we, like in our history, anything that we have taught has always been passed off as someone else's knowledge. So, you know, like it has always become a touchy issue. You know, like there's this word that comes to mind. It's like, in my language, it's called questuta. Do it right. If you're going to do something, you do it the right way. If you're going to be a mother, you do things like there's a process that we are given, we are handed down from our parents, and these are a governing moral system, you know, and this is how we see our wealth, you know, like my honor, my respect, my ability to, you know, like be compassionate, those kind of goals rather than wealth. Mixed into the world that we're given today with Western civilization, it's different goals. You know, there's a goal to incessant need to be rich. There's an incessant need to be something that you don't know why, but everybody wants it, so you might as well too. But that's like completely a different initiative than we're used to, that we're kind of built for, you know, like it's hard to describe, but we call it our way of knowing. And, you know, through like my journey in education, there's been a big struggle to find that validity, you know, like it's kind of hard to really talk to like a bunch of like a room full of Caucasian people and, you know, being the only First Nation and understand this without being like, you know, like trying to blame or, you know, there's kind of negative concepts of it, but it happens. It's something that, you know, like we have been basically used to. So there's that big, huge lump that is really hard for anybody who's doing research to get over. And this is something that they have been very, very careful with, and something they have done the right way. They have taken the right protocol. They have, you know, like encountered us mothers in that proper, you know, like in that proper format, you know, the way that we're to be honored as mothers, the way we were to be asked, and the way we're like, our involvement throughout this whole project has been very thorough. It's been, I guess, the best way to describe it would be to like, they were thorough in their knowledge as far as it exceeds and where it's going. And they have not once made any one of the mothers feel like this knowledge is going to be at one day passed off into ours and see you later. You know, it's a very great project that, you know, like the people like Angela and Carrie, like they're very, I don't know, I'm sorry, I'm a little kind of nervous. This is like a little awkward. I've never really been in this kind of a setting, but, you know, anyways, back to that Indigenous knowledge. Like, it is very important that when approaching cultural things like that, if there is that negative feedback, there will always be that negative feedback if you're not going to do things the right way. And there is a process, and it is very important for you guys, as you guys go into your own research in your own perspective ways, not to just go in with an assumption or go in with, you know, like that you're knowing that basically this is how things are done. It's just kind of like, you know, like it's very important, is what I'm trying to say, is that you guys take the time to understand that knowledge and where it's coming from, and that this has been my people's way of life for as long as it has been, you know, since time immemorial. And our unified goal as mothers, the reason why I personally have joined this project is because I believe it has a place. I believe that it is a solution to a big problem that I see every single day within the children that I one day will teach into my nieces, my nephews, my cousins, kids, everyone that I have. And that is that loss of culture, that loss of identity. And this is where that identity begins, is in that birth. A lot of people don't understand that, one of the those first few days as a mother, that bond with your child sets the role, sets the course, sets the path in which how your child is going to be raised, and being birthed into an environment that's cold and kind of very sciencey, as opposed to something that's natural, where your family is welcome if they want to be. Because right now, if you go into a hospital, it's you have to be very considerate of their workspace, because they have a huge job to do. And as mothers, one of the things that the mothers on the project, a lot of them have not picked apart the healthcare system, because that's not the goal of it. It is not to criticize anything, but instead to build something based on our own knowledge. There are going to be a lot of similarities. There's going to be a lot of that cross-cultural, appearances, but basically this is something that we feel that is important. And a lot of us, some don't understand the importance of how this project actually can make that reconnection. How it fits into truth and reconciliation is just that, kind of like the opposite is happening. Whereas when our ancestors were sent to residential school, there was a separation that was made for us. We were put in boundaries, don't interact with all these different, it was a threat basically for all of us to be able to share knowledge with each other. And one of the major goals was for us to lose our culture and to assimilate into Western civilization. But obviously that way does not work for us. And that is not how it is ever going to work for us. So if there is that in the heart of actual truth and reconciliation, it has to be done right from the beginning. And that's basically where we find that this fits in, is that it's starting from the beginning, the roots, the mother, that bond, the children growing, growing with the right morals, growing with the right guidance. And, there would be a difference, through time, because right now, what my children are being born into and what everybody's children are being born into, I understand why a lot of people do take that chance in birthing their children at home, because they would rather have an environment full of love and comfort rather than something that's cold and, it is uncomfortable. I think for any mother, it would be uncomfortable, but, I think it's just the way our people are, it's not quite similar as we may think. It's the thought process. There's a deeper meaning to us than what is actually being shown. So I guess my advice to anybody who is in the research is to take that time and to understand, respect the knowledge that you do come across. It is universal. It will help a lot of people. And that's basically what I was taught, is that we were given everything, all the tools to take care of ourselves. And, the connections that even myself, just being part of the project that I am making, it's strengthening my own cultural, because I did lose mine. I was one of the few that through education, I did get assimilated. But, for me, that was something that I was always able to find my way back. And in my way, that's when I stumbled along Carrie. And, I kind of found a very welcoming group, a place that I really feel at home, and something in a project that means something to me and also correlates with my future goals of regenerating that culture. So if anyone has any questions or comments, I'm open to that at any time, even to meet me or even to have a discussion. I can talk about basically anything. So.
Now it's working? Okay.
There's an exam on this.
Yes, study it. Everybody, can you hear me okay? Is this working? Yeah, it's going through? Super. So for time's sake, I will kind of just hit on the points that I think are super interesting, and then we can do questions after. And yeah, so we'll just start. This is my schematic I made for myself just to keep everything straight in my own head. Oh my gosh, I spelled research wrong. That's incredibly embarrassing. Oh, so anyway, this is kind of what I'm involved in. The culturally secure birth, so the part on the very right side, that's the project that began all of this, and that's what I'm working on as part of my thesis. The bringing birth back on the other side is where the SCPOR part came in. And those were actually happened in a very, very close time frame. So what happened is I joined SCPOR as a trainee with this Bringing Birth project back, but I was able to take some elements of SCPOR and use it in my own culturally secure birth project. So if that makes any sense for you guys. So basically what I'll be talking about is just this one little blue box over where it says 24 interviews. The rest of this, the environmental scans, the systematic reviews, the surveys, it's all part of, it all informs each project, if you will. Like certain parts of it belong to one grant, but it really is all blending together in a beautiful way. So I've done 24 interviews with First Nations, Métis mothers all across Saskatchewan. We tried to get an equal demographic of half urban, half rural, but if you notice at the very bottom here, it says there's based off the current residents, but each of them came from origin homes that were entirely different. There was 2 women who were sisters coming from the same place. Otherwise, everybody came from a different community. So it's really kind of difficult to make that urban-rural boundary. Even myself, I identify as a rural woman. I've been in Saskatoon almost half my life now, actually, but still, I would never ever say that I'm a city woman, right? So it was a little hard to categorize that, but we did our best. And basically, it was a very open sort of interview. Janice or Jenny could tell you it was kind of more of like a conversation and a story, and we just got the information that we needed, and it happened in a very organic way. But basically, we were looking at what their experiences were of having a baby in a Saskatchewan hospital. And so we recruited, as you normally would, through different venues, through our partners, our community partners, through Facebook, FSIN, different things like that. Lots of word of mouth. Moms would pass it on to their sisters or their friends. It was one-on-one interview, so just myself and the mothers. I would audio record them. Everybody was okay with that, so that was great. And then we transcribed them, and the mothers had the opportunity to look at their transcripts again if they so choose. Most of it was just kind of minor edits. So anyway, so we started reading those, and then the plan from that point was to take the themes and carry them forward to talking circles and a photo voice project. However, we realized there was kind of a step missing once we started bringing this patient-oriented research into it. So then we decided to have this data analysis day, and that's when we invited our mothers. So there's 5 mothers who I directly interviewed, as well as 2 of our research assistants who are mothers, myself. Angela, of course, was there. We had Dr. Brana McKinney, Dr. Holly Graham, and several other academics and researchers, and healthcare workers from the community as well. So and Eileen Thomas. I'm so sorry. Eileen, of course, is there guiding us as always. We'd be so lost without her, and our mothers. So we all came together. I'll just move to the next slide. So we followed this process that's called the Collective Consensual Data Analysis Process, CCDAP. So this, I found in an article by Bartlett, who was a big part of the tubal ligation review and all that kind of stuff that they did here as the external reviewer. So I'm drawn to her work as it is, and then I came across this. She's adapted this process from the Institute of Cultural Affairs and kind of things they do with their processes. So we followed this, and basically the easiest way, I think, is I'll just try to describe to you what we did. So we all got together. We began with a nice meal. We had smudge and prayers to start in a good way. And then we just got into it. And also I'd like to mention that I was able to do this project, this data analysis day, using this STEP funding from SCPOR. If there's any SCPOR trainees who are in the room, you can talk to me about that, about the application process. And so yeah, that was really nice. Thank you for giving me that money so I could do this project. So basically what I did, Angela and I went through the transcripts together and pulled out key codes that were related to my research questions, to our research questions. We printed these out in 24 prints and then cut them out and glued them onto these cardstocks, and there was about 500 of them. So me and Angela spent like 12 hours up in the nursing office cutting and pasting. It was kind of crazy, but we got it done. So we had this awesome day. Basically, I had a stack of papers, and so what I would do is I would read one out, and then we would say, okay, that's this. So it would go under a cardstock. We had, I think 12 categories to start with. Symbols, right, and each category was represented by a symbol. So just random ones like a circle, a square, triangle, star, moon, etc. So we put those up all around the room to be our categories, if you will. So we went through all these cards and then put them where we thought they belonged, basically. And once we were finished that, we went back to them and saw, okay, what are we seeing here? What does this actually mean? And then as a group, we came up kind of with our categories or our themes or words, right? So for me, it was brilliant because I didn't actually have to do a lot of the analysis myself. It was a collective thing. And it was really beautiful because even like when Angela and I were going through the transcripts, we would have some of our thoughts, right, and impose what we think onto these. But then as we came together as a group, it was one of the mothers, like, we were just discussing the cue card, right? And she says, well, I'm just going to speak up and say, like, I was actually that mother. That was my story. And this is what happened. So that was beautiful, right? Because, well, we can't say that. Like, we know that that's what happened. So it was a really, really, I'm not sure what the right word is humbling as well as empowering, and just, it was beautiful to hear everybody come together with all their different perspectives and all their different life experiences, and to do this really great work. So I'll leave it at that. If you guys have questions, we can talk. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the challenges of patient-oriented research, because I think it's a very glamorous sounding thing, but there is a lot of considerations, I guess, before you engage in this. So for me, I'm finding that one of the biggest things is balancing the desire for expediency that comes along with, the academy and things like that, along with the balancing that against the need for consultation with community, because it's a very different process when you're working with Indigenous culture versus when you're working in, the university. So there's always going to be a little bit of tension there. And as the researcher, and it's your job, I think, my belief is that it's your job to kind of safeguard the communities and be the defender so that you have that time to do all that. And that kind of goes in with the next point too, that there's this, a power difference, and we try our best to negate that. But again, it's just the nature of working within the academy. There's sometimes times when you're going to have to be, when you're just have more power, I guess, than the community does. So you have to find ways to negotiate that and come up with contracts and all that stuff. But for me, I was actually just thinking, I'm meeting a friend who's finished his thesis for lunch, and I know he's going to be giving me crap today, like, why aren't you finished? And he's going to give me all these tips about how I could be moving faster. But the fact is that the nature of doing work with Indigenous communities is that it takes more time, and that's just all there is to it. If you want to do it in a good way, what was the word, Janice? What's dude out? Yeah. So that takes time, and that's all there is to it. And particularly when you're working with new mothers who have infants and babies and they're sick and all these things. So you have to be flexible, and you have to be patient and willing to fight, I guess, a little bit for your communities you're working with. So moving forward, the next steps are really exciting. So we did this data analysis day. We have our themes. Moving forward, we will be doing 3 talking circles, one each PA, Saskatoon, and Regina. And then we'll also be doing a photo voice component with that, which is super exciting. We have a documentary photographer who's worked for publications such as National Geographic, New York Times, and so on. And she's going to be coming and doing photographs with our mothers. And we're going to create a really beautiful exhibit and possibly a book or anything. So we're really excited about that. So that'll be the next step. Hopefully we finish that up, wrap it up by August, and we'll be looking to start sharing that in September. So we'll have a video resource from that as well called a Vimeo that hopefully everybody will have access to and watch one day. And that will be about just sharing the stories with the mothers that I know you'll all really want to hear, because it's been really beautiful to be a part of that and hear from them. This is just the next, I guess I'll give it back to you. But yeah, so I guess that's, I'm going to wrap it up since for time. And thank you all so much. I'll have this back off to you.
I'm just going to go backwards a little bit, because that's baby Lennox, and he was at the data analysis. He's our first baby of the project. You can hear him on the tape. Yes. He doesn't cry much. He's adorable. So there was mention earlier of the CIHR. I couldn't remember the full title of it, the gender and whatever. And we are really well represented. Janice and Jessica, 2 of our mother advisors, Kyla, Carrie, Nathan, who are students, graduate, and research assistants, Tarina Belgard, who's with FSIN, who's one of our connections, our consultation person, and Carrie LaValle, who is with First Nations University, who are our partners. And just to say, this is really what it's about. This is baby Josie, who we met up in Beauval, and her mom, and little Lennox, again, he was the first baby of our project, and he's just adorable. We do have a website. You can contact Carrie or myself, and we have just the Indigenous birth, which Sandra picks up. most of the time. So you're kind of contacting Sandra. And we have a Facebook page, which is very recent, but has really taken off, and just some beautiful photographs and things on there. It's so popular that when we were talking about our grandmother group, we had people wanting to come from Nova Scotia to British Columbia going, no, this is just for the province. And people were arguing there are no provinces or boundaries in Indigenous world. Well, yes, but this is what I'm funded for. Anyway, so yeah, we certainly, all three of us are welcome. Or Eileen, if you had a comment, or we have a few minutes left. We're welcome, and online too, WebEx, if there are any questions there.
So does anyone have any questions? I think from WebEx we don't have any at this time. Anyone in the room have a question?
I'm just wondering, are there any, you said there's only 14 midwives in the province. Are any of them Indigenous?
No. And there's either, for sure, one, maybe two that were actually trained in Canada.
Oh, okay. Most of them aren't even trained here. Can you tell us a bit more about the midwifery training that you've been exploring?
Well, what we're looking at is, and was suggested by Advanced Education. So, you know, if the person is going to pay you suggest it, and it sounds good, go with it. Is looking at a post-degree program so we can get midwives out more quickly. And that was part of Ryerson offers one of those types of programs, but with a strong, as I said, cultural component. So the first layer of paperwork has gone into the provost, who has been very supportive. Everybody's been very supportive. Of the 14, some of them are wanting to go part-time because they feel burned out. So it's really, you know, a big concern. I know they were lobbying with the health region to get money for 2 more, but it's not like the country's flush with people, you know, and if you lose people to another province, do they come back? Right now we train people from Mount Royal in Alberta. But, I mean, I could do a whole talk on the benefits of midwifery. And so, yeah, people would want it if they can get it. When it was brought into Saskatoon, they were housed out of St. Paul's because it was supposed to be for any inner city socially vulnerable women. But most of my friends' daughters, my midwife, it's sort of a white lady luxury thing, you know, rather than being perhaps, and now they're over at City Hospital, perhaps being the population that they were meant to serve at the time, to try and engage more in those types of things. So doula's, you know, that interim birth supporter, which is all it is, not care provider, is, you know, at least one way perhaps to connect to women in a cultural way. So we'll see what happens with that.
So just as one follow-up question, when you say like a post-degree program, so how much shorter would it be then?
Probably a year. Yeah. So either nursing, because there's lots of nurses and people who've told me they would have become a midwife if they could. And quite honestly, I was a nurse before I became a midwife, so that model is not unfamiliar to me. Or anybody who's got a degree, who's worked in maternity in some way. That's what we'll be proposing, but eventually to be a direct entry. But, I mean, people want it today. They want it yesterday, so. Jackie had some, yeah.
So comment and then a question. First, my comment, awesome presentation and incredible work. Thank you so much for sharing, all of you.
Thank you.
My question is about the methodology, the CCDAP. I had the privilege of being engaged in a process with Judy Bartlett as well, and what a amazing process. I'm curious about who all was in the room because of the impact of hearing this, what the impact is of actually hearing the voices. So I'm curious who all you had, because you have so many stakeholders. I'm curious who all might have been there.
We do have a lot of stakeholders overall, but for that first project, it was smaller. So Johanna's here. She was part of the first project. She's at the Mother Center. The moms, because they were from all out throughout the province. Eileen, our elder. We had other researchers who were on the grant. Veronica McKinney, who is the medical Northern Medical Services for the North and is very informed. Holly Graham, who's Indigenous faculty with us. Me, you. Oh, Tammy Wilson, who is Indigenous grandma, who is also at Food for Thought out at West Winds, because it was at West Winds. And she was very helpful, and she's so keen on the work that we're doing. So it wasn't a huge group. Yeah, 13 people in total, and 14 if you add Lennox. Yeah.
So just curious about your thoughts for future. Do you have extrapolation of that methodology in your mind? How did you feel about the methodology in terms of
it was
forward?
Yeah, as far as the people that thank you. Sorry. So just speaking to that, like for next time, I thought we had a really good balance. There wasn't much that I would change. We had Eileen there. We had really good Indigenous representation. Like Angela always says, I was the only white lady there. So it was good that way. And I think that it was a good balance of having the moms there. And we had, if we had more academics or more of the healthcare leaders, I would worry that it would start to go more of that kind of lingo and more of that kind of dialect. But it stayed, I think, centered on what the moms wanted to talk about for the most part. So for me, it was good that way. Do you want to say anything about it, Janice?
And Teresa's here. She was there. And Kyla, who are research assistants and sociology nursing students within our program. So
there's 6 of us here who are there.
Yeah. So we're going to write it up, how it worked for us, and Janice will be part of that publication. And then Carrie can put it as part of her thesis. And so, yeah, I wouldn't do it any other way now. And, I've said that publicly, that once you start patient-oriented research, how do you go back? And as a nurse in particular, how do you do any other kind? And I spent 10 years doing a lot of numbers, and I won't go back. No, can't happen.
Looks like we have time for one more question.
Oh, she was just before you.
Oh, thank you so much.
She was being a lovely assistant.
Thank you. Can we go back to one slide? And I have specific questions around, one more, about inequalities between the researchers and the community. So, one more slide. Angela? Oh, well, one more. Did I say? Okay, right here.
All right.
So so I'm very curious about, this bullet point talking about balancing power between academia and communities. So in my mind, there, and then there's a quote there talking about the unequal relationship. That is, to me, when we think about patient-oriented research, I think the inequality should lie in terms of the knowledge that the communities and patients have that are guiding the research teams, right? Like, I think that is the power of the patient-oriented research. However, I think you guys are talking about the balance being unequal coming from the researcher side, right? Like, in terms of when I read the sentence, I'm thinking about communities and patient voices are not being heard and maybe, not taken into account and things like that. So in your own experience, I have some, solutions in my mind, especially the world that I live in, which is data. So there are things like that I think we can do a better job in terms of the knowledge translation for our communities and the patients. But what do you guys think as the problems? I don't want to jump to solutions, but can you?
So for me, specifically when I'm speaking about this, the issues that I guess from my personal experience, it's things like, so for example, who holds the funding, right? Like that needs to be held within the university. So the communities don't have access to that budget. They can't see where it's being spent. They can't access this themselves. If they need their honorariums, they have to access me, who accesses the, bureau. Like it goes all through that red tape. So things like that. And then another thing too, I guess, would be the data itself. So you're kind of speaking about that, right? So the data for the most part needs to be housed within the college or within, the academy. So when communities want to go back and look at that data, it can be really difficult to access it, or sometimes even impossible. So it's just, so when I put that up there, it's just to be hyper conscious of these things. And like when you're doing your ethics, it's like navigating that and figuring out how we can make that better. And then moving forward, even into the future, it's like, how can we set up systems so that this isn't an issue at all? And, so that communities can have the funding within their, hands, or have the data housed within their own places. So that kind of a thing is kind of what I was addressing, if that helps at all.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things, for instance, the survey that we had with all those people, well, and we follow OCAP, and the first project was very urban and women from all over. But now we're really, identifying where people are from and going to those communities and trying to be involved with them. What we did with the survey was, when we're done, it will be the property of FSIN, who represents. So it will not belong to the university. When you're doing an anonymous survey, how do you send the data back to them, right? But here is a trusted, I hope, Indigenous organization, and they have agreed to take that data and they will own it on behalf of those people. Otherwise, the other projects in Ila Lacrosse and Sturgeon, they own that once we're finished with it. There's simply no question about that, in terms of doing the analysis. And once you've gotten and done that once, it's much easier the second and third time, and everybody likes it. So, yeah.
If you don't mind, what I wanted to add is that where this comes from in my eyes, and where is that conflict of our knowledge versus taking that knowledge and passing it off as Western knowledge. So a lot of that speaks to that. So as a researcher, it can be very, very complicated, the processes that you go through, especially when you're approaching Indigenous research. And it is a challenge, I can see it.
Thank you.
Great discussion, everybody. We're going to cap it there just due to time. I would like to really thank all of you. This was an amazing presentation. Thank you for sharing your work. It's very important work. I'm very appreciative of you coming and presenting today. So thank you so much.